Shortcuts. The best way to gain time in a race without having to drive the track the intended way. And sometimes NASCAR drivers are so desperate for points and positions that they're willing to see just how much they can get away with. Some shortcuts are allowed, but most are penalized, and others have required NASCAR to write entire new rules. So in this video, we're on the quest to find the biggest shortcut ever taken in NASCAR history. And it all starts with Turn 6 at Circuit of the Americas. This track is in Austin, Texas, and for the first 4 NASCAR visits, they raced on the full course, otherwise known as the F1 circuit. But for 2025, they shortened it up and raced at the National Circuit layout. The race started out as normal. Everyone was following the rules and staying within the track limits. But the longer the race went on, that changed. Because NASCAR tried explaining what parts of the course would result in a penalty if you cut them, but everyone was still confused. Drivers were cutting turn 6, and NASCAR wasn't even handing out penalties for it. So everyone else said, alright, I'm gonna cut it too. And it started out pretty small, but by the end of the race, every driver was straight up driving off track to get through the turn as quickly as possible. How much could you cut it before NASCAR stepped in? Well, we never actually got to find out. And for some of the shortcuts in this video, I wanted to figure out roughly how much time was saved. So I called up iRacing YouTuber DJ EJ and we went in-game to test them out. So for the first lap, we would drive the track normally, but on the second lap, we would replicate the shortcut routes that drivers took in the actual races. So for this circumstance, we found out that cutting this corner saved drivers somewhere around half a second every single lap. But before we move into the next shortcut, I wanted to shout out Andy for sponsoring this video. You may have seen their NASCAR commercials with JGR driver Christopher Bell recently, and they're also sponsoring him with this sleek paint scheme at Martinsville later in the year. I love the color scheme on this one, especially that iconic orange number 20 on the roof. It was a no-brainer for me to team up with these guys who seem so interested in diving into the sport of NASCAR, and I know who I'm rooting for at Martinsville in a few months. They sent me this fit, which was actually one of Mr. Bell's top picks, and I have to say it looks pretty fresh and actually feels high quality. But there's not only that, there's a variety of different pieces and matching sets over at koofandy.com, and they want to give you guys a 25% discount if you enter the code RG25 at checkout, which I think is pretty cool of them to do for us race fans. And so I'm tossing their link in the top of the description down below. Check them out and you can even see what type of fits Christopher Bell is rocking with. Thanks so much to Koofandy for sponsoring the video. The NASCAR Cup Series just completed a race in Mexico City for the first time ever. And since it was their very first time at the track, we saw moments where drivers took it upon themselves to take shortcuts. Like Daniel Suarez, who was battling for the lead and decided to cut a corner short by driving through the grass. However, he wasn't penalized and even went on to win the race. This is because NASCAR was very firm with their ruling. If you get forced off the track or something prevents you from taking the normal racing line, you could take an alternate route like this as long as you didn't gain any time. This happened even more in the Cup race that followed the next day, but most drivers avoided being penalized. Even if they gained a little bit of time, they would almost always give it back. But that's a pretty small shortcut compared to one of the most unique shortcuts in this video, done by Tyler Reddick. Because at Sonoma Raceway in 2023, Reddick had just passed the pit road entry when suddenly his left front tire went down. This was bad news because Sonoma is a 2-mile road course, and having to drive it at half the speed of everyone else would mean minutes of lost time. But he had one thing on his side. Turn 11 is a 180-degree corner, and there are no walls preventing you from cutting this entire area. At a glance, that leaves a big opportunity for drivers to just simply ignore turn 11 and cut it entirely. This could save you around 10 seconds each lap, but it's straight up not allowed. I recall Juan Pablo Montoya cutting the course like this back in 2013 when he ran out of fuel, and it was just barely enough for him to complete the race. But what if you did the same thing, but backwards? Well, for the longest time, there was never a clear reason why you'd want to do it. But in Tyler Reddick's situation, making a temporary sacrifice in his placement on track meant that he could enter pit road 2 minutes sooner, get new tires, and get back up to speed. And technically, since Reddick went backwards, could NASCAR really penalize him for it? Well, the announcers didn't seem to think so. They applauded the 200 IQ play and almost vouched for NASCAR to not hand out a penalty. So 5 laps after the fact, this is actually what NASCAR decided on.
On further review, he is going to do a pass-through penalty down pit road for shortcutting the course.
We actually went backwards.
And what kind of shortcut video would this be if I never mentioned Dale Earnhardt? He's widely known for his set of passes in the grass. One of them came at Riverside in 1987. There were 2 cars side by side in front of him, so instead of following the course and taking every turn, he decided to completely skip a turn, drive through the dirt, and rejoin the track ahead of both cars. The craziest part is that track limits weren't really enforced in NASCAR. But when you think of the pass in the grass, you're probably thinking of this incident in the same year between Dale Earnhardt and Bill Elliott. Funny enough, not a single pass was made in this clip, so that's when I actually got to thinking. I recall a few times where drivers actually did try using this section of Charlotte Motor Speedway as a means of shortcutting and passing someone. Like in the 2017 All-Star Showdown race, Eric Jones was sitting in 3rd and was quickly catching the leaders who were battling side by side. After a huge run off of turn 4, he made a bold move to take it 3 wide and grab the inside lane. The problem came when he accidentally dipped his left side tires into the grass. The splitters on these cars are practically touching the ground, so when he ran through here, he destroyed his race car. This incident ended his race, so really no time was saved. But then, in the fall of 2017, Charlotte replaced their grass with turf. And this was because NASCAR planned to start using the track's road course layout. So in 2022, Tyler Reddick returns with an attempt at a shortcut, but this time there's a big difference. Cup cars reacted way differently to grass and to turf. Grass would often end your day, but by contrast, turf would more or less let you glide over it without consequences. So when Reddick tried the same move Jones did in 2017, he was actually successful. On the final lap of this Coke 600, he improved his finishing position by 2 spots. And then, in 2024, William Byron did the exact same thing, dipping his car into the turf to also gain 2 positions during the race. Much like the Coda incident earlier in this video, no one knows exactly how much you could cut this before NASCAR steps in, so maybe one day we'll find out. But there was one thing left to do. We tested this shortcut in iRacing as well, but found that it only saved around 0.02 of a second. I'm sure it varies based on the draft and the line you run out of turn 4, and realistically there's probably a million other little things that could affect it, but I think it looks like much more time is gained because in these 2 clips, the drivers in front are sitting side by side. But next, I'm going to show you what's possibly the most unique shortcut in this video, because drivers started using a brand new line at New Hampshire Motor Speedway. So in the corners, lane number 1 has about 2 degrees of banking, but lanes number 2 on up have roughly 7 degrees. This makes the inside line slightly slower in most cases. That changed in 2024. Drivers discovered that they could race on the apron and make solid lap times. Here's why. This race had inclement weather. Luckily, rain tires were an option for the teams, so for the first time ever at New Hampshire, they were put to use. They have less grip than the slicks, so you saw slower corner speeds. And so drivers said, if I'm already going this slow, why don't I just drive on the apron? It's not out of bounds, and it basically has the same banking as lane number 1 anyway. So this became a viable option, especially for passing cars on restarts. In this scenario, you are basically shortcutting the track, because you would never think of using this line in the middle of a green flag run. And for that, NASCAR didn't penalize anyone. Talladega and Daytona are the only 2 tracks where you can really hold it wide open for a whole lap straight. So that proposes an interesting question. Since pit road is on the inside, can you just cut through there to gain time? There was a specific situation where full throttling down pit road was actually deemed okay. Carl Edwards and Randy LaJoie tangled at the 2004 Truck Series race at Daytona. They touched and both trucks were perfectly angled for pit road. So they decided to drive down there and just never lift so they could keep up with the pack.
They might get called for speeding, I would guess.
No, not for that.
You can see that when Edwards enters the pits, he's in 3rd place. And when he exits, he's nearly still in 3rd, but he's going at a slower pace than everyone else. And there's a couple reasons as to why. First, the contact Carl makes with Randy LaJoie is just enough to get his truck bent out of shape. This shaves a few miles per hour off of his speed. Then, for the time that he's in the pits, he's missing out on the benefit of the draft, whereas all the other trucks are getting it. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to put this to the test in iRacing. How much time would it gain or lose if you took full advantage of the pits as a shortcut? So after turn 4, we dove the car into pit lane, and we gained roughly 1/4 of a second by the time we reached the start-finish line. And that doesn't even account for any possible time gain we'd see from also cutting the second half of the pit road in the following lap. So I'd estimate a total of half of a second could be saved from shortcutting down pit road with no loss in momentum. Dave Blaney had a similar incident in the 2007 Daytona 500, but his attempt at a track rejoin was nothing short of a disaster. In theory, you could do this exact same thing at Talladega. I didn't test it myself, but I suspect that it may be even faster. But then there was another shortcut I just had to try. In 2022, NASCAR was racing at the Indianapolis road course, and on the very last restart of the race, I witnessed something I wasn't prepared for.
Your middle, one on your right, still one on your right, still middle.
Ross Chastain took a completely alternate route to avoid the turn 1 cluster, and no one knew where exactly he was going. But all of a sudden, after a few seconds, the broadcast cuts to show that he's side by side with the leader. In this situation, Ross was 4 wide and stuck on the outermost lane. And with how sharp this turn 1 corner is, it's safe to say that he was never making it. If he tried it, he was probably gonna get forced off the track. So instead, he gasses it up and heads for this access road outside of the track. Conveniently, it took him right back onto the racing surface, and he was able to go through here faster than you'd be able to drive the normal way. To this day, I believe this had to have been a pre-planned route by his race team, and that he'd be prepared to take it whenever the opportunity presented itself. This is such an outside-the-box shortcut that DJ and I weren't even sure if this would be an option that we could use in iRacing, but lo and behold, it was. And after taking the normal route for 1 lap, then trying our Ross Chastain impression, we concluded that this was at least 2 whole seconds faster. So if you combine that with the fact that Ross appeared alongside the leader of the race, NASCAR had to step in and hand out a penalty for this move. But getting penalized for this moment didn't faze Ross Chastain a single bit, because just 13 weeks later, he struck again with yet another shortcut. Martinsville Speedway is a half-mile short track with 2 identical corners that force you to slow down after 2 long straightaways. At a glance, it's very unclear where this track would have any type of shortcut whatsoever. You can't really cut it at all, and it only takes about 20 seconds to do a single lap. So how much time could you really save if you found one? Well, if you ever played a NASCAR video game before, you know that the shortcut at Martinsville is actually hidden in plain sight. Because what would happen if you just never slowed down for the corner? I mean, holding down the throttle and hugging the wall to maintain as much speed as possible. For years, drivers speculated that this could be faster, but nobody ever dared to try it in the middle of a race, until Ross Chastain. He was racing against Denny Hamlin, fighting to be the last driver to advance to the Final 4 of the NASCAR playoffs. With 20 laps to go, Hamlin had the edge, passing car after car after car, and Ross Chastain was falling behind more and more. On the final lap, he was 2 points behind Hamlin, and so he knew he had to gain just 2 spots by any means necessary. With absolutely nothing to lose, it was time to put an old adage to the test.
Ross Chastain used the wall all the way around this racetrack to race his way into the championship 4.
And with that move, he beat out Denny Hamlin and secured his spot to the championship 4. His wall ride instantly became famous, and fans named it the Hail Melon move. Since then, NASCAR implemented the Ross Chastain rule, banning drivers from riding the wall at Martinsville ever again. It seems like every race, drivers are pushing the limits to find a new path to the finish. And with that being said, I'm looking forward to seeing what new strategies are discovered in the future. Like and subscribe to the channel, and maybe I'll get to make another shortcut video years down the line.